My hands were black with soot when it started. I was working the loom in Huddersfield, just another ordinary day in 1948, the rhythm of the machines filling my ears until I couldn't tell my own heartbeat apart from the clatter. I'd been a textile worker for years, nothing glamorous, just the grind of weaving cloth, breathing in the dust, and trying to get through shifts without getting my fingers caught. That day, I remember leaning in to adjust the thread tension, something I'd done 1,000 times, when I felt this sudden wave of heat sweep over me, as if someone had opened a furnace right behind my back. The odd thing was, there wasn't a furnace anywhere near. I straightened up, and in that moment, I swore I smelled smoke-thick, acrid, burning wool. My first thought was fire, but no alarms were ringing, no shouting, nothing. Everyone around. Me just kept working. I rubbed my nose, blinked my eyes clear, and shook it off. Maybe it was dust catching in my throat. But then, as I placed my hands back on the loom, I felt a pain. Not a normal scrape or bruise, but a deep, searing pain that ran up my arms, as if my skin itself was burning. I yanked my hands back, staring at them, but they looked perfectly normal. No burns, no blisters. My mate across the line, Arthur, glanced at me and asked, "You all right, lad?" I nodded quickly, embarrassed. What was I going to say that I felt like I'd just shoved my arms in a fire? The shift dragged on, but I couldn't focus. Every time the loom clattered forward, I felt that same sick heat rising, filling my chest, choking me. And then, without meaning to, I caught myself humming. At first it was just a sound under my breath, but soon I realized it was a tune. The strangest part? I didn't know it. I'm not one for songs, never was, but there I was humming. This old melody, soft and low, like it had been buried somewhere inside me for years. It was so familiar it made my stomach turn. I stopped, pressed my lips tight, but the tune kept running in my head, and I swear I could hear a woman's voice faint, high, straining in fear singing it with me. That night, I went home to Margaret, my wife, and tried to laugh it off. But when I lay down, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames. Not in front of me, around me. A whole room of fire, licking up wooden beams, smoke thick enough to claw into my throat. And I wasn't just watching. I was in it. I could feel the panic in my chest, the desperate heaving as I searched for air. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, and Margaret shook me, asking if I was all right. I told her it was just a nightmare, but inside I knew it wasn't just that. The days went on, and things only grew worse. I began noticing details on the loom scratches. Along the frame, blackened marks on the wood near the gears, almost like charred remnants. I asked Arthur once if he'd ever noticed it, and he shrugged. "Old machines, lad. They've been through hell." I didn't tell him that when I touched those marks, I felt warmth, faint but undeniable, like ashes that hadn't fully cooled. And the humming, it never stopped. Some days I'd catch myself whispering words under my breath, words that weren't mine. A woman's words, pleading, desperate. I'd cover my mouth, as though someone might catch me, but the voices stayed. In my head. One evening, I lingered after my shift, waiting until the factory floor was nearly empty. The looms stood silent, their hulking frames like skeletons in the dim light. I walked back to mine, running my hand over the wood, and without thinking, I whispered, "Who are you?" My own voice sounded strange in the emptiness. And then I swear it, I heard a reply. Not through my ears, but in my bones. A woman's voice, clear as if she was standing behind me, saying, "Mary." The name stuck to me like tar, Mary. The more I thought about it, the more the images came. Hair tied back, a plain dress, soot on her cheeks, eyes wide in terror. I couldn't stop it. I'd be sitting at home with Margaret, trying to eat, and suddenly I'd see Mary's hands on the loom, smaller than mine, trembling. I knew how she died before I even admitted it to myself. Fire. She'd burned alive in that factory, in that very spot, and somehow, I was carrying it. I tried to keep it from Margaret, but she noticed. She always noticed. "You're not yourself," she said one morning as I sat staring at the fire in our hearth, lost in it. "Is it the work?" I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I? She'd think I'd gone mad. So I just shook my head and told her I was tired. The breaking point came late one shift when a thread jammed in the loom. I leaned in to fix it, hands steady as always, but the moment my fingers touched the thread, I felt heat explode across my chest. My vision blurred, and suddenly I wasn't in 1948 anymore. I was in another time. The air was thick with smoke, screams echoing across the factory floor, flames bursting from the ceiling. Women were running, pushing, clawing at locked doors, their faces contorted in horror. I was one of them. I knew it in my bones. I was Mary, trapped, lungs filling with smoke, hair singeing at the ends, dress catching fire. The pain was indescribable, like every nerve in my body was aflame. I tried to scream, but smoke poured into my throat, and all I could hear was my own voice crying out, not as myself, but as her. I stumbled back, nearly collapsing, and Arthur grabbed me, shouting, "What's wrong with you, lad?" But his voice was distant, muffled. All I could hear was Mary, sobbing, begging for help that never came. That night, I couldn't hold it in. I told Margaret everything, the heat, the voices, the fire, the name Mary. She looked at me with wide eyes, silent for the longest time. Finally, she said, "My mom told me stories about the mill fire, long before we were married. It was in 1883, wasn't it? A blaze that killed a dozen women. She said they never found all the bodies." The words chilled me to my core. It wasn't just in my head. This was real. Mary had been one of them. For weeks I battled with it. Every time I touched the loom, I felt her. Sometimes I'd even see her reflection in the machine's polished metal eyes full of pain, face smeared with soot, staring at me like she was begging me not to forget her. The nightmares grew so strong I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up choking, clutching at my throat, convinced smoke was pouring into my lungs. Margaret would hold me, whispering that it wasn't real, but I knew better. I couldn't escape Mary. She was inside me, her story carved into my flesh. And then one night, as I sat awake at the table, I realized what she wanted. She didn't want me to suffer. She wanted me to remember. She wanted me to tell it. The fire, the locked doors, the negligence that killed them all. They'd been forgotten, swept aside as history. But Mary wouldn't let me rest until I made sure they weren't erased. So I did. I went to the library, dug through old records, newspapers from 1883. I found at the reports of the blaze, the names of the dead, and there it was. Mary Whitaker, 24 years old, textile worker, burned alive when the fire spread through. The weaving room, her body never recovered. I read her name over and over until the letters blurred with tears. It was her. It had always been her. The next day, I stood at my loom, hand pressed to the charred marks in the wood, and I whispered, "I found you." For the first time, the heat faded, the humming stopped, and I felt peace, not mine but hers. A calm settling in the air, as though she'd finally been heard. I don't know if it was forgiveness or simply relief, but I knew she was gone. The weight lifted from my chest, and I could breathe again. I never told Arthur, never told anyone at the mill. But Margaret knew. She believed me, even if she never said it outright. I worked that loom for years after, and though I never felt Mary again, I never forgot her. Every clatter of the machine was a reminder. Every shift was a prayer for her and the others who died in that fire. Now telling you this, I feel that. Heat again, faint but lingering, like an ember that never truly dies. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some of us carry the dead with us, not as ghosts, not as haunts, but as memories that demand to be remembered. Mary wasn't a stranger. She was me. She was every woman who perished that night. And if I don't tell it, who will? Story number 2. I was bent over my sewing table when I noticed it again. the same shape taking form under my hands no matter what fabric I chose. The client had asked for a simple Sunday dress, nothing fancy, something plain and modest for church. But as my needle pierced the cloth and my hands moved without hesitation, the bodice tightened into a cut that hugged high across the chest. The sleeves flared out into dramatic bells, and the skirt billowed wider than it had any reason to. I stopped, pinched the cloth between my fingers, and cursed under my breath. This wasn't what she wanted. It wasn't even what I intended. And yet there it was, the outline of a style I didn't know but felt so familiar, like a melody you can't remember learning, but could hum perfectly. I ripped the stitches out and started again, muttering that I must be tired, my mind slipping. But the second attempt fell into the same pattern, my fingers moving with a strange confidence, almost like they weren't mine. I remember leaning back, pressing the needle down onto the table, and staring at what I'd done. My throat felt tight, that cut, that sweep of fabric. I'd seen it before. Not here in Timisoara, not in my books or shops. No, I'd seen it in the old woodcuts displayed in the museum by the square, the illustrations of condemned women from centuries ago. The noble woman burned for witchcraft, her dress had looked exactly like this. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. You learn in a town like mine to keep certain thoughts to yourself, especially when people already whisper about you working alone as a woman. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop tracing the scenes in my head. My mind wouldn't quiet, and each time I closed my eyes, I saw fire rising up around the hem of the dress, licking its way to the bodice, consuming it while screams rattled in my ears. I woke up choking on the smell of smoke that wasn't there, sweat sticking my nightdress to my back. The next morning, a neighbor came knocking. Her daughter needed a gown for a wedding. I forced a smile, agreed to it, and told myself I'd do better this time. The girl wanted lace at the sleeves, something soft and white. I sketched it quickly, made her nod in approval, then set to work. I thought if I worked carefully, deliberately, I could keep control. But after an hour, I looked down and realized my hands had betrayed me again. The lace was there, but it circled the wrists tightly, as if to bind. The bodice had taken that same noble shape. And worst of all, I had sewn the neckline high and stiff, choking, not at all the loose scoop the girl had requested. When she came to try it on, her face fell. "This isn't what I asked for," she said softly, not angry but unsettled. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't just dislike it, she was afraid of it. That fear spread. Each client after that, no matter what they requested, left with something altered, something wrong. The skirts were too wide, the sleeves too theatrical, the waists cinched cruelly tight. Some whispered that my style was old, cursed even, not fit for weddings or festivals. I told myself it was nonsense, that I just needed rest. But deep down, I knew I wasn't in control. It was as if someone else guided my hands, and I couldn't resist. I stopped taking commissions for a while, lying that I was ill. But even when I sewed for myself, the same cut returned, the same unmistakable silhouette. I started researching. Late nights at the library, flipping through dusty records of trials. And I found her. Elisabetta Karaksitsanyi, a noblewoman accused of sorcery in 1721. Her wealth, her strange interests, her refusal to bow to men, all fuel for the fire, quite literally. They paraded her through the square, clothed in her unnatural dress, as the trial notes described it, before burning her alive. I saw the sketch again, that stiff bodice, those wide skirts. It was the same as the ones I couldn't stop making. My stomach twisted so violently, I had to rush outside to vomit. You'd think I would have stopped then, locked the sewing box, and walked away. But I didn't. I couldn't. My hands ached if I didn't sew. My fingers twitched until they found fabric. And worse, when I refused to stitch, I started to dream. In those dreams, I wasn't me. I was her. I felt the weight of the gown, smelled the pitch-soaked wood piled around my feet, heard the crowd spitting and jeering, the crackle of the torch, the sudden burst of fire. My flesh blistering, eyes burning, voice shredding as I screamed my innocence to deaf ears. And each time I woke, gasping, the smell of smoke clung to my hair. One evening, I confided in my cousin Anna. She stared at me across the kitchen table, pale and silent, before whispering, "You shouldn't speak of these things." But when I showed her the gowns, laid them out one by one, her hands trembled. "It's her," she whispered. My grandmother told me stories of Elizabeth, how she cursed the line of judges who condemned her. They say she would return through the hands of another woman. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear, as though I had already been sentenced. I tried to burn the gowns. I dragged them into the yard, lit a match, and stood back. For a moment, they smoldered, but then the flames guttered out, leaving the cloth blackened but intact. No matter how much kerosene I poured, they refused to burn. I slumped to the ground shaking, my face wet with tears. And then I swear to you, I heard it. A voice, low and rasping right behind my ear. "Not again," it said. I spun, but no one was there. The next weeks blurred. I hardly ate, hardly slept. My clients dwindled to none, and still I sewed, unable to stop. My tiny workroom filled with gowns, dozens of them, each identical to the last. It felt like a mausoleum of fabric, suffocating me with every breath. I considered leaving town, abandoning everything, but something held me. It wasn't duty, wasn't pride. It was compulsion, raw and unbreakable. I wasn't living for myself anymore. I was preparing something for her. The breaking point came on a night in November. I had fallen asleep at the sewing table, needle still in my hand. I woke to heat, unbearable heat, though no fire burned in the stove. The air shimmered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I was back in that square in 1721. The gowns around me swayed, though no breeze stirred. And then one of them moved, not by accident, not by draft. It moved like a body filling it. The skirt lifted slightly, the bodice stretched, as if unseen flesh pushed against the fabric. My mouth went dry. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. And then the voice came again, clearer, right in front of me. "They burned me," it said. "They will not burn me again." I don't remember standing. I don't remember moving. One moment I was frozen. The next I was running, slamming the door behind me, stumbling into the street. I didn't go back for 3 days. When I finally forced myself inside, the gowns were gone, every last one. The room was empty, the air still thick with the smell of smoke. I collapsed onto the floor and sobbed until my throat gave out. After that, the compulsion faded. My hands grew still. I could sew again normal clothes, simple, modern cuts. No fire, no dreams, no whispers. But I wasn't relieved. I was terrified. Because if the gowns were gone, where had they gone? Who had taken them? Or worse, what had taken them? Weeks later, I heard of a small chapel outside the city that caught fire. No one could explain it. The flames burned hot and fast, but nothing inside was destroyed. Nothing but the altar cloth, which witnesses described as an old noblewoman's gown. My knees nearly gave out when I heard. You ask me if I'm sure, if I believe this really happened. I'll tell you this, I've lived with my hands for 40 years. They are mine, my tools, my livelihood. But for those months in 1965, they weren't. They belonged to someone else. Someone who refused to stay dead. And though she's quiet now, I feel her sometimes when the thread tangles or the cloth catches. A pulse, faint but steady, waiting. If she chooses to rise again through me, I won't fight it. I couldn't then, and I couldn't now. Some fires once lit never truly die. Story number 3. I was kneeling in front of the altar when it started. My hands pressed hard against the cool clay bowl filled with burning copal. The smoke curled up into my face, making my eyes sting, but I didn't move. I had learned to stay perfectly still when the visions came. even if my body wanted to cough, even if my stomach threatened to twist itself inside out. The villagers were gathered around me in silence, waiting for something to happen, waiting for me to tell them what the spirits wanted. I could hear their breathing, quick and uneven, as though they were frightened of the very ceremony they had begged me to perform. It was supposed to be a blessing ritual, nothing more. They asked me to call on the ancestors for protection because a boy had gone missing from the village 2 nights earlier. The police had come and gone, useless as always, and the family turned to me as they often did, whispering my name like both a prayer and a curse. They called me the healer, the oracle, the one who knew things no one else dared to say out loud. I never told them that half the time I didn't want to know these things myself. That night, when the copal smoke thickened in my lungs and my heartbeat grew heavy in my ears, I saw her again. The woman in white, the one who had been coming to me in dreams for months. Only now she wasn't standing in shadows or whispering fragments of words. She was screaming. I could hear her voice tearing through my skull, and it wasn't Spanish. It wasn't even modern Nahuatl. It was older, harsher, full of sounds I couldn't reproduce. My whole body trembled, and when I opened my mouth to gasp for air, her words poured out instead. I don't know how long I spoke before I realized everyone in the circle had moved back from me. Some crossed themselves, others stared wide-eyed. My voice was not my own. It was deeper, raw, the voice of someone who had been dead for centuries. And yet I understood what I was saying, though I had never studied those words before. I was telling them of bones beneath the ground, of women buried alive in honor of a god who no longer answered, of blood spilled in the night. My hands clawed at the earth beside me, and I felt dirt crumble under my nails. When I finally came back to myself, my face was wet, though I hadn't realized I'd been crying. The villagers kept their distance. Only Dona Marta, the grandmother of the missing boy, came close enough to whisper, "You saw him?" Her voice cracked as though she was afraid of the answer. I wanted to lie, to tell her I had seen her grandson alive somewhere, waiting to be found. But what had passed through me was not comfort, it was death. So I stayed silent. That night, I couldn't sleep. The visions replayed every time I closed my eyes, and I felt her presence beside me in the dark, as though she were lying on the mat next to me, her breath hot against my ear. I whispered aloud, "Who are you?" And for the first time, she answered in words I could understand, "You are me." I sat upright, heart hammering, staring into the dark. The words didn't fade with the smoke or dissolve like the half-dreams I was used to. They clung to me like a wet cloth. I thought about what that could mean. Was I losing my mind? Or was I truly carrying the memory of someone who had lived and died long before me? The next day, the boy's body was found by the river, face down in the mud. His skull had been cracked open. The villagers gathered, murmuring about curses, about spirits that wanted more blood. When they looked at me, I could feel the suspicion in their eyes. They thought I had called this on them, that I had spoken death into existence. For weeks afterward, people avoided me. They didn't come for herbs or prayers. They crossed the street when I passed. Even the children who once followed me shyly for candy ran the other way. I told myself it didn't matter. I had lived through rejection before, in another life, the one where my family couldn't bear to accept me as who I really was. But this was different. This was fear, raw and dangerous. One night, Marta came back. She knocked at my door just before dawn, eyes swollen from crying. She said the dreams wouldn't stop, that she saw her grandson's mouth filled with dirt, and each time she heard my voice speaking from his lips, she begged me to do another ritual. Against my better judgment, I agreed. This time, when the smoke rose, I didn't resist. I let her, the woman in white, take me completely. My body stiffened, my eyes rolled back, and I felt myself pulled under. And then I was no longer in my hut, no longer in this body. I was lying on stone, cold against my back, ropes biting into my wrists. Men in feathered headdresses circled me, chanting, A blade flashed in the firelight. I screamed, and it was her scream, the one that had haunted me. I felt the knife plunge into my chest, the searing pain, the flood of blood. When I snapped back, I was screaming aloud in front of the villagers, clutching my chest. Marta was weeping. The others whispered that I was possessed, cursed, dangerous. I shouted at them. She was murdered. They buried her under the stones. You walk on her bones every day. After that, no one came near me for a long time. But I couldn't let it go. Her pain lingered in my body, every heartbeat a reminder. I began to wander the outskirts of the village, searching without knowing what I was searching for. Days blurred. Nights were worse. She whispered names into my ears, names I had never heard, names that belonged to no one alive. Then one afternoon, while walking near the old church ruins, I felt my legs buckle. My knees hit the earth so hard I tasted blood in my mouth. My hands moved on their own, clawing at the dirt, and there it was, the edge of a stone slab, buried beneath weeds and moss. I dug until my nails tore, until I was certain I had found what she wanted me to see. Beneath the slab was a pit, and inside were bones. Dozens of them. Skulls stacked together, rib cages collapsed inward. The stench rose like something freshly rotting, though they must have been centuries old. My stomach turned, and I vomited into the weeds. But I couldn't stop looking. One skull still had remnants of a jade bead in its mouth. Another had a crack through the center, just like the boy from the river. I stumbled back to the village, dirt on my face, blood under my nails, trembling like a mad person. I told them what I found. No one wanted to believe me. But when a few men went with torches and returned pale-faced and silent, the fear spread like fire. They accused me of calling the dead, of waking something that should have stayed buried. That night, rocks were thrown at my house. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner with a knife in my lap, waiting for them to come for me. But it wasn't the villagers who came. It was her. She appeared in the smoke from my candle, her face bloodied, her chest torn open, her eyes burning with something more than pain. She whispered again, "You are me." And this time, I believed her. I saw it clearly then. I was her reborn. The priestess sacrificed to a god who abandoned her. The woman whose body was thrown into the pit with the others. Her rage had lived inside me all this time, waiting to be spoken aloud. I went back to the pit the next morning, even though I knew the villagers would be watching. I stood over it, staring down at the bones, and I spoke the words she pressed into my throat. They poured out in a language older than any I knew, but they felt like my own. And as I spoke, the earth trembled. It was not my imagination. I felt it shift beneath my feet. The villagers screamed and ran. Some shouted that I had cursed them, others that the dead were rising. But I stayed. I finished every word she gave. Me, until my voice broke and blood trickled from my lips. Then the earth stilled. When I looked again, the bones were gone. The pit was empty. Only the jade bead remained in the dirt, glinting in the sun. The villagers never forgave me. Many left, saying the land was poisoned. Those who stayed avoided me completely. I am alone now, but I am not afraid. I know who I am. I know whose voice lives in mine. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I still feel her lying beside me, her breath against my ear. She doesn't scream anymore. She only whispers one word, over and over, soft as a lullaby. Remember. And I do. Every moment, every cut of the blade, every breath of smoke, every bone in the earth. I remember it all because I lived it twice. Story number 4. I woke up to the sound of humming. Not mine, not my wife's, our baby's. He was 6 months old at the time, barely able to form sounds beyond the gurgles and cries that filled most of our nights. But that morning, lying in his crib beside our bed, his lips were moving with a rhythm that was far too deliberate. I remember sitting up fast, heart racing, thinking I was still half dreaming. My wife, Alina, stirred beside me and squinted toward him. We both listened. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't even babble. It was a melody. A soft, measured tune, like a lullaby being sung on a breath too thin for words. At first, I thought maybe it was some instinctual sound babies make. But then I heard the shape of words, guttural, fluid, and ancient. I didn't recognize them, but the cadence was unmistakably language. Elena's eyes widened. "He's singing," she whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around her chest. The hair on my arms prick. We leaned in closer, careful not to startle him. His tiny chest rose and fell, his mouth forming syllables he couldn't possibly know. There was a sorrow in the melody, a drawn-out repetition that settled into me like a stone in water. It wasn't nursery nonsense, it was something with history in it. Something with weight. When he finally drifted back into sleep, silence filled the room like a rush of cold air. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I kept trying to rationalize it. Babies mimic sounds, don't they? Maybe he'd overheard something, some song on the radio, or a tune from the neighbors. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. I'd never heard anything like those sounds before, and judging by the look on Elena's face, neither had she. Next day, it happened again. This time in the afternoon, while Elena was feeding him. I walked into the room and froze in the doorway. She wasn't moving. She just sat, spoon half raised, staring at him with tears sliding down her face. The melody was stronger now, the words sharper. "Do you hear it?" she asked when she noticed me. I nodded, my throat too dry to answer. We started recording him on an old tape player we kept for background music. When we played it back, the sound was even clearer than we remembered. It wasn't babble at all. A friend of mine, Manuel, worked at the university in Granada, so I asked him to listen without telling him what it was. His face changed within seconds. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. When I told him, he didn't believe me. He said it was classical Arabic, the kind spoken centuries ago in Al-Andalus. He translated a few lines. "Sleep, child of grief. Sleep, and remember not the fires. Sleep, for the sword spares none." I felt something tighten in my chest when he said it. He wanted to know who had taught my son, but of course, no one had. When I pressed him, he admitted it sounded like an old Moorish lament, possibly sung before or during the Reconquista, when Muslim families were slaughtered or driven from Spain. He said he'd heard fragments of it once in a lecture, but this was longer, fuller, almost complete. That night, Elena wouldn't put the baby in his crib. She kept him in her arms, rocking him, whispering prayers over him. I didn't sleep at all. Every time his breathing shifted, I thought the singing would start again. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Over the next week, the songs continued. Always at strange hours, midnight, early dawn, sometimes just before sunset. Each time, the melody grew heavier, the words sharper. He sang about mothers wailing in courtyards, about children carried away by soldiers, about fires burning homes. Elena began to deteriorate. She said she couldn't bear to listen anymore, but she couldn't turn away either. She grew pale, restless, jumping at every sound. I started smoking again after years of quitting, standing outside at night with my hands trembling, trying to keep the images from Manuel's translation out of my head. Then the incident with the neighbor happened. An old woman named Dolores came by with bread, as she often did. She adored our baby, always cooing over him. But that day, when she leaned down to touch his hand, he began singing right in front of her. Dolores froze, her face draining of color. She crossed herself quickly, muttering a prayer. Then she backed away and left without another word. She never came to our door again. That shook me more than I can explain. This wasn't just inside our home anymore. It was spilling out, infecting others. Elena insisted we take him to a priest. We drove to a small parish outside town, where Father Jose listened patiently as we tried to explain. He asked to hear the recording. As it played, He closed his eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. When it ended, he looked at us with something between pity and fear. "This is not the voice of your child," he said softly. "It is something using him, a soul that cannot rest." He sprinkled holy water on the baby and gave us a blessing, but I could see his hands shaking. That night, my son sang louder than ever before. The sound didn't feel like it was coming from his throat. It filled the entire room, resonant, almost shaking the walls. Elena covered her ears and sobbed. I held the baby, but he didn't even look at me. His eyes were open, wide and distant, as though staring at something beyond us. The words came out like waves, crashing over us. Desperate. I drove back to Granada the next morning and confronted Manuel again. I begged him to translate everything we had on tape. He reluctantly agreed, and when I returned later that evening, he was pale, smoking nervously. "It's all about massacres," he told me. "Families slaughtered in their homes, children taken, women crying for their husbands. It's specific, too specific. Your son shouldn't know this." Nobody should. Elena and I began fighting. She wanted to take the baby away, leave the house, leave Almeria altogether. But I told her it wouldn't matter where we went. The songs were inside him. We couldn't escape them. She screamed at me, asking if I wanted our son to be possessed forever, if I even cared. Of course, I cared. But I didn't know what to do. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Around midnight, I woke to find Elena gone from the bed. The baby's crib was empty. My chest seized with panic, and I stumbled through the house calling her name. I finally found them in the kitchen. She was standing by the sink, holding him tightly against her chest, whispering. At first, I thought she was praying. But then, I realized she was repeating the Arabic words, mimicking his songs. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Elena," I whispered, stepping closer. She turned slowly, her face hollow, her lips still moving with those foreign sounds. I reached for the baby, but she pulled back, clutching him tighter. "He remembers me," she said in a voice that didn't sound like hers. "He remembers. Us all." I don't know where the strength came from, but I lunged forward and grabbed the baby from her arms. She screamed, not in pain, but in rage, like something primal was tearing out of her. I ran upstairs, locking the bedroom door behind. May, she pounded on it for hours, crying, begging me to let her in, promising she wouldn't hurt him. But I couldn't. The next morning she was gone. No note, no trace, just gone. I reported it to the police, but they found nothing. No one saw her leave. She simply vanished. After that, the singing stopped, completely. My son never made another sound like it again. He grew up normally, first words, first steps, school, everything. He doesn't remember any of it now. Sometimes I wish I didn't either, but here's the part I've never told anyone, not even him. A year after Elena disappeared, I went through her things, trying to make sense of what had happened. Tucked inside her prayer book, I found a folded piece of paper. On it were the Arabic verses, carefully written out by hand. But beneath them, in Elena's handwriting, was a single line in Spanish. "I will remember with him, so he is not alone." I don't know if she was taken, if she gave herself over, or if she simply became part of the song. But every time I close my eyes, I hear it again, faint and mournful. The lullaby of the dead, sung through the lips of my son, carried into the heart of the woman I loved. And I know that wherever she is, she's still singing. Story number 5. I was pruning the vines when it first happened. My hands were raw from the shears, and I remember staring at a cluster of grapes, so dark they almost looked black. When a wave of dizziness nearly knocked me over, I dropped the vase, shears, and grabbed the wooden post beside me, trying to steady myself. But it wasn't just dizziness. It was like my mind was being pulled somewhere else, like a thread caught and yanked hard. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. Then I saw it. Not the vineyard around me, not the Douro Valley in 1988, But another vineyard. The same soil, the same land, but older somehow. The rows looked different, the workers dressed strangely. And there was a man. His hand was on my throat, squeezing. My own hands clawed at him, and I felt the panic of suffocating, the bitter air cutting into my lungs. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was on the ground with dirt under my nails. One of the other workers, Anna, was shaking me. "You fainted," she said, her voice tight with worry. I told her it was nothing, probably the heat, but inside I knew that wasn't true. I'd fainted before, sure, but never like this. Never with someone else's hands around my throat in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lived that moment before, like I wasn't just imagining it. The next few days, the vision stayed with me. Every time I walked between the vines, I felt watched. I'd hear the creak of old wood, though there was no wood nearby, only stone terraces. I'd smell smoke, though there was nothing burning. At night, I dreamed of the same. Man, dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes that burned with something between love and hatred. And every time, his hands closed around my throat. I'd wake gasping, clutching my neck. One night I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I went to my aunt's house in Paso de Rigua, where she lived alone. She had always been the one in the family who listened, who never laughed at strange things. Over tea, I told her about the visions, about the man, about how real it all felt. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting it. "You know," she said, "these lands are old. Older than the houses. Older than the vines, they remember." I asked what she meant, and she told me stories I had never heard before about lovers who disappeared in the early 1700s, a vineyard girl and a landowner's son. Whispers of jealousy, betrayal, and murder. The bodies were never found, but the story lingered like a stain. I laughed at first, because it sounded like the kind of folklore everyone tells to scare children. But when I left her house that night, the air felt heavier. Walking back through the narrow road to the vineyard, I couldn't shake the certainty that I was the girl she spoke of, that I had lived that life, that I had died there. The next morning, I couldn't resist testing the thought. I went out to the farthest section of the vineyard, where the ground was rougher, the soil uneven. I don't know why, but I felt drawn there, like a string pulling me. I knelt and pressed my hands to the earth. The moment my fingers touched the soil, a scream tore through my head, not mine, but hers or mine from before. My body trembled. As I saw flashes, the man's face twisted in fury, his hands strangling me. Then the sensation of being dragged, my body heavy and limp, through the rows of vines. He dug, he buried. I knew exactly where it had happened. I don't know how long I sat there shaking, but eventually, Anna found me again. She asked why I was digging my fingers into the soil like a madwoman. I told her I thought something was buried there. She gave me a strange look, but helped me mark the spot with a stone so no one would see. That night I couldn't sleep. My dreams weren't just dreams anymore. They were memories. I remembered his voice, whispering my name as if he loved me, then cursing it as he killed me. I remembered the smell of the wine on his breath. I remembered struggling until the stars above me blurred into black. I knew I had to go back. 2 nights later, I returned with a spade. The vineyard was silent, except for the insects buzzing low in the grass. Every scrape of the spade against earth echoed like thunder in my ears. I dug until my arms burned, until sweat dripped into my eyes. Then the sound changed. A hollow scrape. I froze. My breath caught. I brushed the dirt away with my hands, trembling, and felt something solid, curved. It was bone. I stumbled back, the spade clattering to the ground. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I just stared at the pale curve of skull peeking from the earth. My chest heaved, and I couldn't tell if I was breathing in this life or choking again in the old one. The next morning, I told Anna what I had found. At first, she didn't believe me, but when I showed her the disturbed earth, the glimpse of bone, her face drained of color. We told the overseer, and soon the police were there, digging carefully, pulling out not one, but two skeletons. A woman's smaller, and a man's larger. The bones tangled as if they had been buried together. I thought I would feel relief, vindication even, but what I felt was worse, because the moment I saw the man's skull, I remembered something I hadn't before. He hadn't been just a lover. He had been everything. The way he looked at me before the rage, before the jealousy, was pure, desperate love. And the moment he killed me wasn't the end, it was the result of a betrayal. In that instant, standing over those bones, I knew I had betrayed him first. The dreams grew worse after that. Every night, I didn't just see the murder, I saw the beginning. The stolen kisses between the vines, the promises whispered under moonlight, the betrayal with another man, the fury in his eyes when he found out, and then the strangling, and then the dark. I told Aina I was going mad, that maybe I had imagined everything, that maybe none of it was real. But then I realized something terrifying. The bones had been found together, two bodies side by side. One of them had been me, yes, but the other had been him. He hadn't just killed me, he had killed himself, or someone had killed him after. Either way, his body was here too, in the same soil, under the same vines. I couldn't eat. I couldn't work. I could barely breathe without feeling his hands on my throat, his breath hot against my cheek. Every step in the vineyard felt like walking over my own grave. One night I decided to end it. I walked back out there, to the spot where the graves had been uncovered, the earth still raw and exposed. I sat down in the dirt and spoke out loud, as if he were listening. "I know who you are," I whispered. "I know what you did. But I know what I did too. We're finished now. We can't keep living this." My voice cracked and I broke down sobbing, clawing at the soil like I had when I first saw the vision. I begged him to let me go, to let this life be mine and not hers. And then something happened I can't explain. The air grew still. For a moment, the night sounds stopped. No crickets, no wind, just silence so heavy I thought it would crush me. And then, deep inside, a release. Like something uncoiled. From my chest, some knot I hadn't known was there. I fell onto my side, exhausted, and slept right there in the dirt until dawn. When I woke, the heaviness was gone. I still remembered everything, the visions, the suffocating, the betrayal, but it felt like memory, not a wound. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. I didn't hear the whispers. I walked back to the house, filthy and sore, but lighter. The police never solved the case. They called it a historical burial, nothing more. No names, no records. Just two unknown skeletons in the Douro Valley. But I know the truth. I lived it once, and I relived it again. And I'll never forget it, because part of me knows it wasn't just her story. It was mine. I don't talk about it much anymore. People don't want to hear stories like this. But sometimes, when I walk through the vineyard, I still feel the echo, not the suffocating hands, not the rage, but the love that came before it. That's the part that scares me most. Because what if love, not hatred, is what ties us here? Again and again, until the vines themselves remember every breath we take? Story number 6. I was still living in Sendai in 2012 when everything I'm about to tell you happened. You know how it was after the tsunami? Everything broken, scattered, people trying to rebuild their lives, neighborhoods filled with both rubble and silence. My cousin had lost her home, so she and her husband moved in with me for a while, bringing along their little girl, Hannah. She had just turned 8. Sweet, quiet kid, but there was something different about her, even before the strange things began. She had this way of watching things too carefully, like she was always listening to something none of us could hear. One evening, a few weeks after they moved in, I was sitting at the table with my cousin when Hannah came in holding a notebook. She sat across from me and started drawing. I leaned over and froze. She was sketching bodies, charred black, crumpled on the ground in horrible detail. Some of them were crawling, their hands stretched out like they were begging for water. I snapped at her gently, asking where she learned such things, but she didn't answer me directly. She just looked up with those wide, serious eyes and said, "I saw them when I died." At first I thought she meant the tsunami. Plenty of kids were traumatized, having nightmares. But when I asked, "When you died, you mean during the wave?" she shook her head slowly. "No," she said, "before, long before. When the sky turned white and everything burned." It made my stomach drop, but I didn't press her then. I told myself kids pick up fragments of things adults say. Maybe she'd overheard us talking about Hiroshima, though none of us ever did around her. Still, the drawings bothered me. That night, after everyone went to bed, I went through her notebook. Page after page of burned figures, collapsed wooden houses, rivers filled with floating bodies. She had even drawn a ruined school, its roof peeled back like paper. The next morning I asked her softly if she had seen pictures of that somewhere. She shook her head. "I remember," she said. "I remember the heat. I remember holding my brother's hand, but then his skin stuck to mine." She lifted her palm and showed me as though the marks were still there. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't look scared. She looked like she was telling me what she ate for breakfast. I couldn't shake it. That night, after everyone was asleep again, I searched online. I pulled up survivor accounts from Hiroshima in 1945. Do you know what I found? The same details. The same grotesque images she had drawn. The skin sticking, the rivers full of bodies, children with melted clothes. It was all there. Except Hannah was only 8 years old. No way had she read any of it. Things escalated after that. Hannah stopped playing with toys. Instead, she started collecting little piles of ash. At first, I thought it was dirt, but I caught her scooping cold ashes from the wood stove into a bowl. She would sit cross-legged and count each pinch of ash aloud, whispering numbers in a low voice. I leaned close one day and realized she wasn't whispering Japanese. It was a harsh, old dialect I didn't recognize. When I asked her what she was saying, she answered, "Names. Names of who?" I asked, "The ones who burned," she said without looking up. "I'm trying to keep count. I didn't finish last time." I got chills so sharp I thought my teeth would rattle out of my mouth. She was so matter-of-fact about it. My cousin and her husband brushed it off as trauma mixed with imagination, but I knew what I was hearing. It wasn't just imagination. She would sit there for hours, her tiny fingers sifting through ash, her lips moving. One night I woke up to the sound of coughing. Horrible, raspy coughing, like someone choking on smoke. I rushed to the spare room where Hannah was sleeping. The air reeked of burning. I shook her awake and the smell vanished instantly. She blinked at me and whispered, "It's starting again. The sky is burning. Do you hear them screaming?" Her body was cold with sweat. I swore the walls themselves carried a faint echo of cries, but I told myself it was in my head. The next day, I tried to distract her, asked her if she wanted to go to the park. She looked at me with this strange sadness and said, "It won't matter. The fire comes everywhere. It found me here too." And she pointed at her own chest, right over her heart. The real breaking point came one afternoon when she was helping me hang laundry. She suddenly dropped the sheet she was holding and stared past me. I turned, but there was nothing there. Her face went pale and she whispered, "Mama?" I said, "Your mama's inside." She shook her head violently. "Not her. My other. Mama, she's calling me." She ran forward, toward nothing, and screamed so hard my ears rang. She collapsed, clutching her arms. When I reached her, her skin was covered in raw, red marks like burns. I panicked, rushed her inside, showed my cousin. But by the time we laid her down, the marks had already faded. My cousin insisted it was stress, maybe even self-inflicted scratching. But I knew what I saw. Hana lay there with her eyes open, murmuring in that old dialect again. I bent close and caught fragments, something about the river, smoke, and ashes in the wind. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed proof. The following evening, when she was calmer, I asked her direct questions. I said, "Hana, what was your name before?" She hesitated, then whispered a name I had never heard. Takako. I pressed her, and she said, "Takako Ishii." I was 10. I was at school when the light came. I looked it up later. Takako Ishii, there it was. A name on one of the countless lists of the dead from Hiroshima, a girl about that age. I can't describe to you the feeling. It was like someone took the air out of my lungs. For weeks after, Hana seemed to exist in two places at once. Some days she was just a little girl again, helping her mother cook rice, laughing faintly at cartoons. Other days she was Takako, speaking about burning, about rivers full of the dead, about how her body felt when the fire melted the skin from her face. I couldn't stand to hear it, but I couldn't shut her out. Then came the final night. I woke to the sound of her voice singing softly. It wasn't Japanese, not modern Japanese anyway. It was a lullaby, old and haunting, the melody so strange it made my chest tighten. I crept to the doorway and watched her. She was sitting on the floor, the bowl of ashes in front of her. She was counting again, whispering between verses of the song. She looked up at me and smiled, not Hana's smile, but someone else's. "I finished," she said. "I counted them all. What happens now?" I asked before I could stop myself. She tilted her head. "Now I can go." I felt something shift in the room, like the air was thicker, heavier. She leaned forward, scooped the ashes into her small hands, and let them pour out slowly, like sand through an hourglass. "They're waiting," she whispered. "All of them. My brother, my mama, my papa. I can hear them." I rushed forward, trying to shake her, to snap her out of it. "You're Hana," I shouted. "You're my cousin's daughter. You're alive here with us." Her eyes met mine, and for a second I swear I saw two faces layered together, Hana's and another girl's. Older, scarred, her mouth twisted in pain. The vision broke when Hana collapsed. I caught her before she hit the floor. She was breathing, but barely. My cousin called an ambulance, and we rushed her to the hospital. The doctor said exhaustion, shock, possible post-traumatic stress from the tsunami. They kept her overnight for observation. She woke the next morning like nothing had happened, smiling shyly, asking for breakfast. But the notebook was gone. So was the bowl of ash. We never found them again. And Hana never spoke of Takako again either. It was as though the moment she said she'd finished counting, it all ended. She grew up normal after that. No more drawings, no more strange languages, but I can't forget it. I can't forget the way her voice sounded when she said, "Now I can go." I can't forget the burns that appeared and vanished on her skin. And I can't forget the name she gave me, Takako Ishii, a real girl who died in Hiroshima in 1945. So when people ask me if I believe in reincarnation, I don't give them some vague answer. I tell them this story. I tell them about Hana, and the ashes she counted, and how I saw two faces staring back at me in the same pair of eyes. Because once you've seen something like that, you can't unsee it. Story number 7. I woke to the sound again, faint at first, like a sigh slipping through the branches, then sharper, clearer, unmistakably the cry of a child. It pierced the stillness of the orchard, that hollow pleading tone that could never be mistaken for the wind or for animals. I sat up in my bed, my bones stiff from age, my chest heavy from the years of labor in these fields. Bursa had been my home all my life, the orchard my only inheritance, my only burden. But at 70 years old, I had never heard children here at night, at least not until last spring. When the voices began, the first night I heard them, I convinced myself it was the neighbors' children playing late. They lived half a kilometer away, but sound travels strangely in the valleys. By the third night, when I heard whispers that moved between the rows of my trees, whispers too many and too layered to belong to one family, I knew something was wrong. My orchard wasn't big, only about 2 hectares, but at night it felt endless, stretching wider with every step I took between the trees, as though the trunks rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking. I tried to ignore it, at first. I'd close my shutters, shove my pillow against my ears, and tell myself I was old and my mind was fraying. But denial works only so long. The cries grew sharper, urgent. Sometimes it was a single wail, broken and thin, like a baby left to starve. Other times it was a chorus, dozens of voices screaming, gasping, calling for mothers who would never come. And then, one night, I heard a word. A single Turkish word, clear as though a child stood right beside my bed. Su. Water. That broke me. I rose before dawn the next morning, grabbed my walking stick, and went straight into the orchard. The air was cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of soil and fruit blossoms. My hands trembled as I touched the bark of the nearest tree, half expecting it to pulse beneath my palm like living flesh. But the orchard was silent. Not a bird, not a child, not even the buzzing of bees. Just silence, too complete to be natural. That day, I refused to nap. I kept myself awake by pruning branches, sharpening tools, tending to the soil, exhausting my body so that maybe, when night came, I would sleep too heavily to hear them. But sleep never came easy anymore. My mind replayed that one word, Su, over and over. It felt directed at me, as though they knew I could hear them. 2 weeks later, I told myself I'd prove there was nothing there. I set out after midnight, with a lantern, walking between the rows, each step crunching the soil louder than I liked. The cries began almost immediately, surrounding me, darting from tree to tree. My lantern flickered, and every time the flame dipped, I swore I saw movement just beyond the glow, small shapes darting low to the ground. Like children crouched between the roots. My chest seized with panic, but I forced myself deeper, into the farthest corner of the orchard. And that's when I stumbled on it. A shallow depression in the soil, not wide, but long, maybe 2 meters. The earth looked disturbed, darker than the rest. I leaned down and dug my hand into dirt. It was softer, as though recently overturned. My breath caught when I pulled out a splintered piece of wood, worn smooth at one end like it had once been carved. I dropped it as though it burned me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the night after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the depression in the ground, that rotten wood, and I knew what it was. A grave, several, maybe. Children's graves. That week, my body betrayed me. My dreams came back, but they weren't dreams. They were memories or visions, something far worse. I stood in the orchard, not as I am now, but younger, stronger, dressed in clothes from another century. My hands gripped a jug, and I poured liquid into a bowl. The children came, barefoot, hungry, small faces pale with need. They drank eagerly, one after another, until their eyes grew heavy, their legs weak. They collapsed at my feet, one by one. And I stood there, watching, expressionless. I woke screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, my throat raw. The stench of poison clung to me. Even after I bathed, I told myself it wasn't real, that no memory could survive death, but the dreams repeated. Every detail sharpened. The children's clothes, the cracked bowl, the exact tree line where they collapsed. And each night when I walked the orchard, the cries led me to that very place. I tried to confide in Hazen, an old friend who lived nearby. Over tea, I told him about the voices. He chuckled nervously and said, "You're lonely. Old age makes the mind play games." I told him about the grave. His eyes narrowed. He shook his head. "Don't go digging up the past. Let the dead rest." But his voice trembled, and I knew he feared what I'd said. The next night, the cries grew unbearable. They didn't whisper or wail, they screamed, all together, hundreds of children shrieking in agony. I stumbled outside, pressing My hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't outside, it was inside me, vibrating in my skull. I fell to my knees, clawing at the soil where I'd seen the depression. My fingers bled as I tore into the earth, ripping out clumps of dirt until nails snapped and skin shredded. And then I hit something solid. Bone. A child's rib cage, fragile, half crumbling. I collapsed backward, bile rising in my throat, my entire body shaking. The cries stopped instantly, replaced by silence so sudden it made me weep with relief. But the silence didn't last. By morning, the cries had returned, quieter, closer, more intimate, like breath against my ear. I heard them in the kitchen as I chopped onions, in the stable as I fed the goats, even in the bath as I scrubbed my skin raw. Always the same word, Sue, water, begging me, accusing me. I stopped eating. My body grew thinner, weaker. I couldn't step into the orchard without trembling. But the worst came when I looked into the mirror. For a fraction of a second, I didn't see myself, I saw him. The man from my dreams. The younger version of me, or whoever I had been. His face filled with cruelty, his eyes flat and lifeless. And then he was gone, and I was left staring at my own gaunt reflection, my lips whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Who would believe that I had once been a monster, a landowner who poisoned children to protect his harvest? Yet every night, the orchard reminded me. Every night, the cries pulled me back to those graves. And every night, the memories grew heavier until they weren't memories anymore. They were confessions. One evening, I gathered water in a bowl and carried it into the orchard. My legs shook, my arms barely strong enough to hold the basin steady. I placed it on the soil above the graves. "Drink," I whispered. "Please drink." The night air pressed against me, thick, waiting. For a moment, I thought it had worked, that the cries would fade. But then the water darkened, turning murky, sour, the smell of rot filling my nostrils. The basin tipped, spilling black liquid into the earth. The screams returned louder than ever, but this time I understood the words, not just Sue. Other words, fragmented, broken, but clear. "You did this. We are here. Never. Forgiven." I dropped to my knees, my forehead pressed into the dirt, sobbing. I begged forgiveness. I clawed at my chest. I offered them my life. But their voices only multiplied, rising into a chorus of grief and rage that drowned every thought in my head. And then silence again. When I opened my eyes, I saw them. Not ghosts, not shadows, but clear figures of children standing between the trees. Their faces pale, their eyes wide, their skin bruised and sunken. They stood in rows, watching me. None spoke, none moved. Just stared, endless and unblinking. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move. Finally, the smallest one stepped forward. A boy, maybe 5 years old, with dirt in his hair and cracks. In his lips, he raised a trembling hand and pointed at me. His mouth opened, and in a voice not his own, but mine, the voice from my dreams, he said, "Again." I collapsed. When I woke, it was daylight. The orchard was empty, the soil unbroken, the basin gone. But the cries never left after that. They live inside me now. They echo in my chest, follow me into every corner of the house, every second of waking life. They do not want water. They do not want forgiveness. They want me to remember. They want me to carry what I did, lifetime after lifetime. And I do. I haven't stepped into that orchard in 3 months. I can't. The trees rot, the fruit withers, but I can't touch them. Every night I hear the children, and every night I dream this same memory of pouring poison into their bowls. Sometimes I wake with dirt under my nails, though I don't remember. Leaving my bed, I tell you this because I can't hold it anymore. My family thinks I'm senile, that the old man is losing his mind. But I know the truth. I was him. I am him. The land remembers. The children remember. And when I die, they'll follow me into the next life, waiting for me to repeat it. waiting for me to fail again. I don't know how to end this story. There is no end, not for me. Only the orchard, the graves, the children, and the cries. And every night, that one word I can never escape. Sue, water. But it isn't water they want. It's the life I stole. And one day soon, they'll take it back. Story number 8. I was 19 years old when I started working at the docks in Manaz. It wasn't a job I had planned for, but work was scarce, and a man with strong arms could always find employment moving crates, loading riverboats, or hauling nets. The first days were simple, tiring but honest. I would wake early, work until my hands were raw, and return home to collapse in my cot. But after only a few weeks, something began happening that I could never explain, though I tried to. Ignore it at first. It started with names. Simple names that surfaced in my mind like bubbles from deep water. I would be lifting barrels when I'd suddenly whisper, Silvio Pereira, or tying rope when the words, Ana Beatriz Ramos, would slip from my mouth without me realizing. At first, I thought it was nonsense, perhaps names I'd overheard in passing. But they kept coming, dozens of them, always when I was near the river or the boats. One day, a coworker asked me why I was muttering. He had heard me repeating, Clara, Clara de Silva, over and over as though calling someone. I laughed it off, embarrassed, but inside I felt a deep unease I could not shake. I began dreaming of drowning. The dreams came night after night, always the same, a crowded boat, the sound of people shouting, then the cold crush of water swallowing everything. I would wake gasping, heart hammering, lungs aching as though I had truly been underwater. What unsettled me most was not the drowning itself, but the faces. They were clear, too clear, like memories instead of dreams. A man with a mustache gripping the rail, a young woman clutching her child, an old priest crossing himself as the river rose around him. When I woke, their names lingered, unshakable, etched into my mind. One morning, unable to bear the weight of it anymore, I mentioned the dreams to an older dock worker, Paulo. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand, a scar of decades working. The river. When I told him about the boat, his face changed. He didn't laugh or call me crazy. He grew pale, nodded slowly, and asked what names I remembered. I recited them without hesitation, 6 names at once, tumbling out of me as if I'd been waiting to say them. He stared at me for a long time before whispering, Those people died. They all died on the Sobral Santos. I didn't understand, he explained. Many years earlier, before I was even born, there had been a riverboat disaster near Manaus. The Sobral Santos had capsized, taking hundreds of lives. He swore the names I'd given him belonged to passengers from that boat, people long buried under the river. I laughed nervously, accused him of joking, but his expression never changed. He insisted it was true. That night I couldn't sleep. I felt sick, cold all over. I had never read about the tragedy, never heard the details from my family, yet. The names kept pressing into my mind as if demanding I acknowledge them. I decided to find out for myself. The following week, after work, I visited a small local archive where old newspapers were kept. I asked about the Sobral Santos. The clerk fetched a box of yellowed papers, and I sat there turning brittle pages. My hands trembled as I read the lists of the dead. And there they were, the names that had haunted me for weeks. Ana Beatriz Ramos, Silvio Pereira, Clara de Silva, even the priest I had seen in my dream, Father Joaquim Ferreira. My stomach dropped. My blood turned cold. I wanted to run from that room, but I forced myself to keep reading, even as nausea rose in me. That night, the dreams worsened. I wasn't just drowning anymore. I was living it. I felt the panic of the passengers, the screams, the weight of bodies pressing against me as water rushed in. I knew where the boat split, how the current dragged people under, how the air filled with choking cries. The faces were not strangers anymore. They were companions, fellow sufferers. I knew them as if I had once stood beside them. And then came the worst realization of all. I remembered my own name. Not the name I carry now, but the name I carried then, Joe Mendez. A simple dockhand, just like I am now. The memory was too strong to deny. I knew it in my bones. I had been there. I had died on that boat. I had drowned with those people. The life I was living now was not my first. That knowledge unmoored me. I stopped sleeping. At work, my hands shook so badly I dropped tools and crates. People noticed. They whispered about me, some saying I was cursed. I avoided Paulo, avoided everyone, afraid of the look in their eyes if I told them more. But I couldn't escape it. The river called me. Every time I walked along the docks, I felt it pulling me closer, whispering with a voice no one else could hear. One evening, after everyone had gone home, I found myself staring at the dark water, trembling, yet unable to step away. I felt as though something waited beneath, something unfinished. Against my own will, I climbed into a small rowboat and pushed off into the river. I rowed without direction, as if guided by unseen hands. I stopped in the middle of the current, heart hammering, and let the boat drift. The silence pressed in. I thought I might collapse. Then the water began to ripple, though no wind blew. The surface shimmered, and I saw faces. Not reflections, but faces staring up at me from beneath the surface. The very people from my dreams, Silvio, Ana, Clara, the priest. They looked at me not with anger, but with recognition, as if welcoming me back. My vision blurred. I heard voices, hundreds of them, murmuring all at once, like prayers spoken underwater. I knew then what they wanted. Not fear, not vengeance, but acknowledgement. They wanted to be remembered, not lost in the current of time. I don't remember. Rowing back. The next thing I knew, I was on the dock again, the rowboat tied, my hands raw from gripping the oars. I stumbled home, shaken but clear-minded. For the first time, I understood. These memories, these visions, were not a curse but a calling. I had survived in this new life, but part of me was still bound to that river. To those who never escaped. In the weeks that followed, I began speaking about it. Quietly at first, only to those who would listen. I told the families of the names I knew. Some wept, others prayed. A few refused to believe, but I saw in their eyes that they recognized the truth I carried. It gave them comfort to know their lost ones were not forgotten. Slowly, word spread that I was the boy who remembered the dead. Some mocked me, others avoided me, but many came to me in secret, asking if I knew their loved ones too. I never claimed more than I knew. I only repeated what pressed into my mind, what rose like bubbles from the deep. I gave them names, fragments of memory, the final moments I had seen in dreams. It was painful, yes, but also healing. For them, and strangely for me. Each time I spoke the names, the weight on my chest lessened. Each time I shared the memories, the dreams grew less violent. Years have passed since then. I am no longer the young man trembling at the docks, but the river never leaves me. Even now, when I walk along its edge, I feel the pull, the echo of water rushing into my lungs. I feel the presence of those who went down with me all those years ago. Yet I am not afraid anymore. I know who I was, and I know who I am. I drowned once as Joe Mendez, a dockhand lost in the tragedy of the Sobral Santos. I awoke again in this life, bearing memories I did not ask for. At first, I thought they were a curse, but they were a gift, painful yet profound. A second chance not only for me, but for those whose names I carried. They live on through my voice, through the stories I share. The river took our lives, but it did not take our memory. And so I remain here, still, by the docks, still listening to the quiet murmur of the current. The river has claimed me once before, and one day it will again. But when that day comes, I will not fight it. I will slip beneath the surface and rejoin the faces that have watched me all my life. For I was theirs once, and I am theirs still.